Bishop Eric Rona, the Diocese Secretary, Manicaland Diocese, Reverend Mserebo, our dear Education Secretaries, Archdeacons here present, rectors, principals, and heads of schools, deputy heads, senior teachers, diocesan staff, basers, accounts clerks, members from the corporate world, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. We welcome you to the National Anglican Schools Association 3rd edition. We met 3 years ago in Masvingo. Last year we met in Gweru, and today we are in Mutare, Manicaland. Before we talk about anything, the period between last workshop and this one, we lost 1 or 2 teachers, 1 or 2 learners, 1 or 2 lay people who were in the administration and the non-teaching staff in our respective schools. May we stand to observe a minute of silence. May the souls of departed rest in eternal peace. Amen. May I find out those from Manicaland, can you show by standing? Although they are hosting, let us welcome them. Thank you so much. Manicaland. Thank you so much. Central Zimbabwe. Wonderful. Let's praise them. Thank you so much. Masvingo. Let's welcome them. Then Anglican Diocese. Let us welcome them. Thank you for coming in your big numbers. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the men who are behind the scenes. May I invite all the education secretaries to come up front. We have Mr. Tarunga, who is from Manicaland. He works alongside Ben Shikomba, who is not up front, and Reverend Tereko, who is the Education Secretary. We have Reverend Ogweni for Masvingo Diocese, and we have Reverend Mawerera for Central Zimbabwe. We have our President of the Association, Mr. Mafa. Thank you, gentlemen. We are meeting for these next 2 days, and we'll be writing on a theme: strengthening school leadership for effective governance. Strengthening school leadership for effective governance. We have not given out the hard copy. We only have a few copies, but we are now in the AI era. I'm sure you received the copies, the soft copies, through our education secretaries. Allow me to invite the President so that he gives us a short welcome, and he invites the Lord Bishop to welcome us to the Diocese of Manicaland.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nyansanza. He did not introduce himself. He is our Secretary General for the Association. And Reverend Mawerera happens to be our Treasurer for the Association. My Lord Bishop, allow me to write on the protocols that the General Secretary has already given. It is a pleasure to stand before you here and warmly welcome you to this third chapter of our workshops. You may realize that in terms of numbers, we have got more people. We have come to join us. It's a deliberate move that we made on our part as education secretaries. All along, we're focusing on the school heads and deputies as well as bursars. We then took note of the fact that whenever there is a vacancy notice coming out, it would give us challenges, especially in the leadership of the organization, in the leadership of the schools, or as responsible authorities, to identify people that we can recommend for the posts that are advertised, like deputy heads. You may be well aware that as responsible authorities, we have a say through to the public service as who becomes a school head in our institutions, who becomes a deputy head in our institutions. And so if you're a senior teacher and you find yourself here, you're on stage 1, where we want to start preparing you for any of those posts. It is so important to us, and in particular as Anglicans, that we brand, that we speak with the same voice, that we identify ourselves as a unique group. I'm yet to hear that other churches are also doing workshops as well as conferences like we are doing. I know I've already been told by the PEMSEC, the ministry, that what we are doing is such a wonderful thing, and they wish all the other responsible authorities would also do the same. I think we need to clap big hands for ourselves as Anglicans. We always say we lead, others follow. And for your interest, even in the Association of Church Education Secretaries, we lead as well. So the influence of our church in education, we cannot deny it. So by being here and being identified with the Anglican Church, attending these workshops, you are our ambassadors. All the good that people talk about the Anglican Church, and please let it not be the bad. Make sure you ask yourself, what are my superiors thinking of what it is that I am doing? So I want to really warmly welcome you once again to this workshop. Not only do we focus on workshops, in August we also meet for a conference whereby we invite outside speakers to delve into some of the issues that we feel will add value to our works in our institutions as Anglicans. And I want to say to you, these 2 days should actually groom you, should open your minds and prepare you to move into the next term as well as this next year before our next workshop with a different vision and a different approach to doing things, so that at least we carry on with our brand of the Anglican Church. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite our guest of honor, who is none other than the Bishop of Manicaland, to come and address us. Please do stand. Welcome once again, my Lord Bishop. This is your flock.
Thank you. We may resume our seats. Thank you very much. I allow me to observe the protocol that has already been established, and may we recognize the leadership of the National Anglican Schools Association and the education secretaries. Normally when you are officially holding an event like this one, a speech is prepared for you, but these guys chose to expose me, and I've loved to stand here. I'm a man of numbers, and expose how many Anglican schools we run in Zimbabwe, and of those which ones are doing what, so that the world might know. But anyway, if that is it, may allow me to just say welcome to Manicaland, the Diocese of Manicaland. We always call ourselves, always at provincial level, at national level, I always remind all bishops that Manicaland is the home of Anglicans. Because you can't be the majority in the Anglican Church, unless you come from Manicaland, whether in Harare or Pontutu or wherever. Last time I was speaking to the Bishop of Manicaland, he went to Choloncho and found some Samanyika there. It is not by accident that we have so many Anglicans. We have so many Anglicans in Zimbabwe coming from Manicaland. And the answer is only one. It is not the number of congregations, but it is the number of schools that the Manicaland has. Currently we run 54 schools, but they are not the only schools. We have more than 80 schools established by the church, but now being run. And I'm sorry to say, most of them being run down by rural district councils. I'm able to say that, and I'm ready to defend myself, because I can actually take them around. Because most of our congregations here in Manicaland are still located. Most of our congregations are still located in the same areas. And if you go to, in fact, literally, Makoni district, where I come from, we have literally a school in every village. If not in every village or every 2 villages, we have an Anglican school. In some of the villages, they are actually known by names of schools. There is an area that is, a whole area that is known as St. Bede's. And if you ask what is St. Bede's, it's an Anglican school and an Anglican church. If you go to Nyazura, you get a place in Kozigan who's with Johanna. And if you ask who is Johanna, you ask it, you'll find it is St. John's church at Bangori. So that's how. But the reason why we have many, we are proud of having evangelized on behalf of the Anglican Church in Zimbabwe is simply because the number of schools. Most of the people who eventually become responsible Anglicans, they have come from our schools. My history tells me that when first missionaries arrived, whether it was in Inyati, they tried to approach the kings, their sons, and tried to send them to school and so forth. It was not successful. It was only after the missionaries targeted the young ones through schools. And who evangelized more than everyone else in this missionary journey? It was the teacher or the head who was also a head home catechist. You could not be an Anglican church leader or a head without being a catechist. And most of the schools were established by those heads, teachers, home catechists. I know this because my grandfather was one of them. He is known to have established or founded 7 schools from St. Andrews, Kwamadziwa, those who are familiar with the geography of Makoni, to St. Peter's, Pachicho, single-handedly, of course with the support of others, because he was one of those who were very early on, wakaenda Zambia. And the story of how he went to Zambia was an interesting one. He found Sekuru Wake was able to converse with the whites and in English. So the 2 brothers went to Nasekuru and they asked Sekuru, "Tirudo mshonga utiti gone kutaura newana." And their thinking, in my opinion, was that panika mshonga kaiswa paspell email kana kuti kanyora kaichekwa here, so that you are able to converse with these people. Then he was told, "Oh no, for you to be able to speak to these people, you have to go to school. And the school was none other than St. Augustine's. So the brother went to Mvuma to work mine Mangura. This is what was Mangura back then. And he paid fees for the young brother. And after the young brother graduated and was now working with the missionaries, he also paid for this elder brother, and that's how it worked. So, when you look at yourself, don't just look at yourself as teachers. You should look at yourselves as missionaries. Because without your support as missionaries, the church is going nowhere. If you realize most of our congregations now, they are stuck with people who were evangelized back then. I have been a priest in Harare. I was a priest here. The very people who were young in the early and mid 80s, most of them, they are now in their 60s and 70s. They work about the church. And when I go around my churches for confirmation and other events, if I see a young woman, I can figure out from Yeruanzan, chances are that it's my own foodies. And you then ask the chair awards and do 60, treasurer do 80, and do 60 of one or two church banana. And who is letting us down in all this? I'm sorry to say, the teachers of today, you are letting us down. You've abandoned your calling, and you really believe that the clergy will come around and do it. No, they've never done it. They've never done it. History has it. And after all, if they try to do it, I can give you an example. In Manicaland, we have more than 70 clergy. 70 clergy. No matter how hard they try, this is 70 clergy against 345 non-congregations. Those that are not known, I'm not even referring to them. So how does it work? 70 against 345 congregations. So who must we trust with evangelism, which church program? Because these clergy I have, they are overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed. They have no time to do for new members. Because the members they have, the old ones, are enough problems and enough challenges. So why are we because when people age, your ministry shifts from shift from funeral, tombstone. So on a ministry, ministry to do where one did we go a tombstone. Because never to baptism or maternity. So it is my prayer that as we meet and discuss, know that these schools that we run are basically mission schools. And by mission, it means you are on a mission. And you should ask yourself, what is the mission of the church? I hope somebody during our time here will speak about the 5 marks of mission of the Anglican Communion. So we are on a mission, and we should continually ask ourselves. With these words, I declare this conference officially open and welcome you. Thank you.
We may sit. The church has spoken, and we have all heard it. Thank you, Lord Bishop, for officially opening our workshop and for welcoming us to Manicaland. Not Manicaland, but Manicaland Diocese. Not Manicaland Diocese, but Anglican Diocese of Manicaland. We may now break for tea. It's not yet. Oh, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, allow me to invite Lord Bishop to unpack the theme of the workshop. We might just look at the theme and wonder what it really contains, what it is really up to. Over to you, Lord Bishop. May we all rise. A reminder to those who have forgotten to pay. A general reminder.
Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you very much. I think the word corporate needs to be defined. Unfortunately, I have not done much on it. I hope somebody else will do it. Because when you talk of corporate governance, we are talking of how leadership is undertaken at corporate level. When you talk of corporate level, we are talking of the highest possible leadership, highest form of leadership of any form of any organization or governance. So that is what we call corporate. In fact, when you talk of corporate governance, the typical term that we know is head office. And so that's the corporate level. And when you talk of corporate level, we are talking of the strategic level, where strategic decisions are done. By strategic decisions, I'm talking of the level where the strategic plans are developed. Any organization must principally have only one strategy. And the other lower tier or lower level organizations must have implementation plans of that strategic plan. So Zimbabwe is saying Vision 2030. So other lower levels of government, whether they are RDCs or they are government departments or they are whatever, Manomanyane vision, initiative, the same thing must apply to us as a church. I think as Anglican Council of Zimbabwe, we've agreed on a vision, on a mission, and on values. And it is important that at some point, at corporate level, those who are in leadership, whether it's NASA or any other, or it's ACZ, or any other level that leads at national level, must constantly refer to that corporate strategy. So here today, I will try to make it easier. I want to begin by discussing corporate governance issues. What are corporate governance issues? When you discuss and somebody says these are corporate governance issues that are at the apex of leadership or governance of our schools, which issues should we call corporate issues we should worry about and focus on. I just present just examples of those corporate governance issues. Let me begin by just giving a context. The Anglican Church in Zimbabwe is a pioneer in terms of provision of education. Some of you might not know that when colonialists came, the British in particular, when they came to this country, they had not much interest in education, because their interest was mining initially. You know, the Red Concession is all about mining claims and, business. We are one country that was occupied or colonized by a company, the British South Africa Company of Cecil John Rhodes, and his founder, the guy who financed all these guys, was a diamond digger. I know he provides many bursaries. His institute provides many bursaries to build halls. Alfred Bates was the brains behind and the sponsor of Cecil John Rhodes. So basically, when colonialists came in here, they wanted cheap labor for the mines, and later the government that became very serious in agriculture was only after the 1930s, and especially the government of Ian Smith and others. Those ones were more of agriculture or farmers than miners and so forth. So their interest was cheap labor for the farms, cheap labor for the mines, and education and schools was not part of it. That's why we find that before independence, the majority, if not all, schools, rural schools, were established and run by churches. And these were established actually against government policy. Governments of the day would always consistently make it difficult for churches to establish schools. But the church had a slightly different agenda from the colonial establishment. They wanted to empower communities that they worked with. That's why they established as many schools. And when these schools were established, they were established without government support. Government support only came in after one white missionary, a Church of Christ missionary, a Bishop Bakazoita Prime Minister. And after running to go and after Diana and he came to government and said, guys, but churches are suffering, how can we support them? And that's when the per capita grants and support to schools became established. They came from government. So be that as well, I want to give that as a background because it shapes our governance system. Currently we have, as I said, Manicaland has 54 schools. I'm not sure, I hope by the end of this conference we are able to establish the number of schools that we run. And arguably we produce the best results in whatever province that we are located. If you go to Marsh East, almost always it is Daramombe and St. Anne's, and St. Louis, that are almost always competing. And when these schools were founded, we must admit one thing, that missionary agencies were involved and funded the establishment of these schools. So missionary agencies back in England, back in South Africa would fundraise and give money to those on the ground to fundraise. And like I said, the government assisted at some point. So this is the background of how our schools, the schools were established. It was church and the church alone that established those schools. The older teachers, we now have very few now. I can tell you who was paying them salaries. Back then, like here from Manicaland, those who paid salaries would come from Harare, from the education office in Harare, and so forth. So our current situation is that the church now has limited resources, sources of income to continue to provide education to the poor. Infrastructure for the longest time has been dilapidated, and parents who have now been taken on board to do school development, they gradually do so. And some of our staff who run our institutions, we lack the financial literacy and the capacity to run school and development programs. Even on a very lower level, we have schools, boarding schools and schools that have no plumbers, that have no electricians, that have no carpenters, that have no, there's no artisans and people who are able to run these facilities. So we are stuck in schools where infrastructure is crumbling in our own eyes. And rather than looking for these experts, we prefer Amazon. By financial literacy, I mean, what do we do after I receive money? The latest book, I'm talking of those of a poverty mindset. Wakapata mari cheti vanobhadhara zvikwereti kusvika mari yese yapera watanga kukwereta futi. It's not like money tiri kubata shomaka, but iri kubatwa nevanhu vane poverty mindset. Kungobata mari hapana chimwe chatinofunga kubhadhara zvikwereti. Kana tapedza kubhadhara zvikwereti tobva tatanga kukwereta futi. Patinozotanga temi ino yatinenge takatokwereta kudhara, totanga tabhadhara zvikwereti futi. The latest statement that I got this week there was, when you have a poverty mindset, more money will not solve your problems. When you have a poverty mindset, more money will not what? Solve your problems. Because actually, as soon as we get money, what the rich do, whatever amount they get, no matter how small, they set aside a percentage to towards the basic expenses that they cannot avoid. And they set aside way more, but on whatever end they get, they reserve a portion for investing. A portion for what? For investing. So ndo vanhu zvisizvo zvandakatarisa munhu ndinogona kunge zvitofunga kuti pachikoro pazvinorana hapana nzira yekuinvesta mari yavari kuwana. Musi wamuchapedza basa ndopamuchaona kuti muchibata mari yakawanda kuburikidza mune makuzowana ipapo. Muchazenge makutemba kuti takatambisa mukana. So whatever little we get, let's make it a point kuti part of it we must invest, no matter how small. Wese vanhu vakapfuma, vanhu vakabudirira hawana kutanga nekuwana mari yakawanda. Tsvagai nhoroondo yevanhu vese vanovina loto, vanovina inonzi mabetting aya. Kuina mari yakawanda handiko kunopedza nhamo dzevanhu. Nhamo dzevanhu dzinopedzwa nemindset yakanaka. Inomuudza kuti kana wabata mari nyangwe shoma sei, imwe ndeyekuimbeu. Funga ndosoko randakataura, imwe imbeu inofanira kudini? Kudyarwa. Kana yadyarwa yozodyiwa yadini? Todya yaibva. Funga kuti ukadyara mudzi 1, vaani mudzi chaiyo yemagwere, kudyara 1. Panopera season, mudzi iyo inokupa chii? Handinokupa muguri vakazara. So I think it is a good analogy. So I think we need to also think of, we have situations of outstanding property and land ownership issues to be settled. Most of the schools we run, we are not even sure of what land tenure are prevailing in that land. Whether this land, chikoro chatinorana chine lease here, chine title here, chine session here, chine chi, hapana anoziva. So it is important as leaders at those schools to think of that. But ultimately, whatever investment we make, we must make viability and feasibility studies to facilitate our planning. By viability, I was saying whatever project you implement, you must ask ourselves, is it viable? By viable, if the end game is to make a profit, can I make a profit? And by profit here, I mean profit that is above inflation. But I want to profit to what questions are answered. Kuti unoita profit yekuti pawakasotanga mari zvaigona kutenga nemari usati waita profit, hauchagoni kuzvitenga waita profit. It means the profit will be below inflation. But zvinonzwiswa nevanhu vane financial literacy yakati tukai asi ndizvo chaizvo. So when you talk of corporate governance issues, I'm going to talk about infrastructure development, staff development, land and property issues, and feasibility and viability. Let me start with infrastructure. You know, when you discuss issues at corporate level, we should not worry about mombe ichadyiwa nevana, ichatengwa kupi, bridge richawanikwa kupi. No, it is stooping too low. Those issues are management issues reserved for secretariat or administration or a very low level tier of leadership. We should be worried about infrastructure. Because we should look at our infrastructure as forms of investment. The current situation we have right away, when you talk of infrastructure, is that most of our rural day students do not pay fees. If they pay, it's not enough to make as repairs possible. And in most cases, infrastructure is not enough. And as the schools require additional teachers, accommodation, classrooms, laboratories, and related equipment such as computers and ICT. You know, our economy right away from where we are is driven by ICT, and very soon artificial intelligence will take off. But what will happen to a learner from that remote village who has never seen a computer? We have a glimmer of hope because our boarding schools are producing better results, and dioceses require plans to increase or construct new boarding schools or increase enrollment, that is increasing our boarding and dining facilities, as well as increasing. So I think in terms of our trajectory, our corporate issues should focus on increasing enrollment in the existing school, as well as establishing new schools. Most of us, we are stuck in schools that were established by missionaries. And we have proven beyond over and over again that we have no capacity to think beyond maintaining the status quo. So at corporate level, we should now start thinking of how do we ensure that we increase the number of schools or expand the enrollment on the existing schools. Because the population is increasing. And so should the capacity of our schools and the number of our schools also increase. When missionaries, when the colonialists came, the population of this country was less than 400,000. It was a tiny population, but ever since we are now around 17 million. But is it reflected in the increase of education opportunities and the other related provisions? For some, if not all dioceses, our boarding schools are our cash cows. And at corporate level, we should also think of increasing enrollment in these boarding schools and establishing new boarding schools. But going to staff development, the most important resource for any organization are its human resources. The most important resource, it's not money, it's not infrastructure, but it's human resources. Therefore, success and failure of any plan rises and falls on leadership, as John Maxwell says. So we should ask ourselves, do we have enough qualified and competent staff to deliver in terms of administration, to deliver in class? I think we've done well in terms of delivering in class, but I think our main challenge is the capacity to run schools and develop them. Most of our leaders are managers. They know how to control, how to do logistics, but when it comes to envisioning and really provide leadership that is required, and it's seen in staff development. How many of our school heads and their boards and their STCs are prioritizing staff development, development of human capital? How many of them would sit around a table and say human capital development is a priority for us? So my advice is that as dioceses, we must identify teachers with potential and develop their skills. And our focus, like I say, we must focus on those with the potential to be heads and deputies. And as usual, we have a challenge in science teachers, so we need to start thinking of that as well, develop capacity in that area. By that I mean we need to find those with potential and offer them opportunities to start, offer them opportunities to also do what you do. There are many things that we do as leaders, but we must expose those who we lead to also do the same, so that when our time comes to retire, the church must struggle to look for successors, not because they are not there or they are not as obvious as the case is now, but you will be faced with, rather than when you have one vacancy, how about having 10 candidates strong to the point that after interviewing them, you end up using certain considerations that are not related to the job. Also, but otherwise, we saw one worker when we need people in leadership, we really struggle. So I think for us to do well, areas of financial administration, fundraising, key also to staff development. One of the investments or one of the key things we have is land and property as a church. And we, as a church, we risk losing our property unless work is undertaken to establish our boundaries and reclaim our land. How many of you who, if we are to be honest, who are leading schools but do not even know where the boundaries are? It's the majority. It's assumed. Because do you know where the boundaries are? It's not about what you've been told by a village head or by a friend, but to have a document in your hands, respected by the deeds office or by the government, which gives you boundaries. And in most cases, we have experienced some land that has been occupied. We have heard stories in Cyrene Mission, where, in fact, Cyrene Mission, one of our former bishops, he actually the second bishop of Manicaland, Bishop Sebastian, was one of the first students at Cyrene Mission. So we have a very close relationship with Cyrene Mission. At St. Augustine's at Zambia, we have most of our the land out there has been occupied by illegal or invaders. Don't know what term we can give them. But bottom line is it has been illegally occupied. These are some of the issues we have to deal with. So to keep this, dioceses must work with local authorities, traditional leaders, government officials to establish boundaries of property and land. And this means that to achieve this, we look forward to schools and school heads to ensure that this is budgeted for in our annual budgets. And we should also, beyond that, work with our archdeacons, our registrars, so that these boundaries are established. We have had an experience in one of our schools where we have to bring about the RDC, the Ministry of Lands, the local government, the traditional leaders to go to Holy Family in Nyatanza, where the education sector of Harare comes from, to establish boundaries. We noted that the boundaries that were always known, some areas were already occupied, and we agreed to, rather than demolish those houses, we had to compromise and agree that we incorporate some grazing lands nearby so that they become part of the mission. It is a very technical exercise, but I suppose and suspect that ever since we have not had more people encroaching onto. And then finally, one of the corporate issue is to work on whether what we plan to do is feasible, whether it is doable, whether it is possible. And even if it is possible or not, we should also assess whether it is viable. Because whether you like it or not, we should run our institutions as business. And when we talk of business, we should run them either, if we are not really interested in profit, but we should run them in such a way that we balance our budgets. What we kill is what we eat. But at the best, we must almost always have excess for future developments. So this is only possible when we have a feasibility study or a viability study. Whether we want to undertake something for profit, is it viable? Are we going to get income? So this involves research. We should not just do things, but whatever we do, we undertake must be research-based. I'm not sure what your time is like, because right away I now want to transition to something. These were just overhead issues as regards corporate. These are corporate governance issues I selected. There are much more corporate governance issues, but for now I want now to transition to discuss, share with you how the corporate governance situation of the Anglican schools look like. So our corporate governance issues look like this. The role of responsible authorities. Actually, Section 75, subsection 2 of the 2013 Constitution. I want to assure you that section has not been amended. It gives the right to the responsible authorities to establish independent educational institutions. This means that our establishment of educational institution is not now protected by individuals or by politicians, but by the Constitution itself. It gives responsible authorities, or any person, it says, has a right to establish, maintain independent educational institutions with reasonable standards that does not discriminate on any ground prohibited by the Constitution. But as a church, as you know, we are allowed to discriminate on the basis of our beliefs and faith, because I think those are not, it's not prohibited by the Constitution. So the Anglican Church has established and maintains many Anglican schools. And in all our dioceses, I've checked the the constitutions, they state that the bishop of particular diocese is by virtue of his divine and canonical position is responsible authority of all Anglican schools in the Anglican Diocese of the Church of the Province of Central Africa. And in executing his mandate, he works with education commissions or boards, educational secretaries, and many other leaders. Parents are important in our corporate governance issues, but I won't talk about that now. I want to talk about ownership. Ownership is an important component of corporate governance. The Anglican schools are private schools, and they are owned by dioceses. And like any other dioceses, our Anglican dioceses are episcopally led and synodically governed. So when you talk of an Anglican school, it is not a one-man band. You must clearly identify who your bishop is. You must clearly identify the board or synod that governs your institution and so forth. I think it is important. We see many people who speak on behalf of the Anglican Church and on behalf of our schools. But the policy that we adopted, which has been adopted by ZCC and which was borrowed from mainly our Anglican gives, defines who the voice of the church is, who in the same manner becomes the voice of the school is, who speaks on behalf of the school, who speaks on behalf of the church. Yes, it says the bishop is the voice, but they can appoint or assign. There are many people who work in the bishop's office who are allowed to issue statements, but in most cases they verify. Then we come to the Board of Governors. Since time immemorial, since the time of the establishment of the schools, the church has always had Board of Governors. So if you look at any document that establishes any other structure, it makes a reference to existing governance systems. As you will see in the presentation, school development committees only came into force in 1992 through the enactment of a statutory instrument number 87 of 1992. That's how soon they are. And they are coming to be involved in schools that were established in the 1940s, in the 1930s, and in the case of St. Augustine's, 1891. So the general manner in which governors are established is almost always the same. The bishop consulting his education commission, education board. But the composition varies. The composition varies. So in terms of the new policy that we are submitting to the ministry, it gives the composition. It continues to mention that parents' assembly will always elect members into the SDCs, and the SDCs will also be represented in the Board of Governors in an ex officio capacity. But I think there are issues that are becoming a challenge. The Board of Governors does not run the day-to-day affairs of a school. I think this must be very clear. because we see leaders, heads who are not confident about what they do, to the point that they literally consult the Board of Governors on a daily basis on decisions which are supposed to be. You know, when Board of Governors come to meet, they approve your budget, they approve your, they chair your finance committee. They've given you full power and authority to run their affairs. In fact, they are a board. You see the point? Just like a school development committee, they are a committee. If they are not meeting as a committee, they don't function. So don't consult them individually and on a daily basis. So the chairman of the board, in consultation with the school head, shall call for meetings whenever necessary. This habit of boards that appear on the schools without invitation and they dictate to headmasters what to do. I don't know what kind of headmasters. I think there's a sense in which some of us as headmasters will become so weak that we can't even trust any of our decisions until and unless somebody comes. We are fortunate because Board of Governors basically represent the diocesan interests. But even though, of course, it is an expectation that they meet once a term, but if resources permit, they can meet even twice at the beginning and at the end of the term. So the duties are clearly articulated. They help with the running of the mission through the school head. People of God, as responsible authorities, we run schools. But you will never see us on a daily basis in the schools running their affairs. Because we have people on the ground who do it for us. Imagine me being bishop and calling shots in 54 schools. Then calling shots in 345 congregations. Does it work? So when I think a time there's some from this bishop, people who got bishop and bishop bari. When I work for this, not every matter, boy, also from the bishop, daughter, and also bishop, and remember. Honorary master, which is Yans, I was this or daughter, and also education secretary. Our name era. Andrew, when you put your approve a budget, a bit in a ship, and when SDC a bit in a ship, you want to pay the robbers and they will commit. Particularly, and they would say, I'm son of one of what days, what days, come on board in Maya, I'm doing a quick. To size Anna. So I think it's important. One of the key functions of a board is not just to receive allowances, but one of the key functions is also to raise funds. To raise funds. How many of your boards are raising funds? A board of governance. Wanaunza mari kuti taiso sebhodi takamirira sebhodi taunza mari panapa yekutenga bhazi taunza mari yekuita taunza mari wangani zvakafanana nema-SDCs. Most of our SDCs, one of their key responsibilities is to mobilize resources for school development, but they only know one method: leaving parents. Parents who are broke, because it's also by nature, we don't enroll one now. No enroll community. Wobva uchitipa zanzo rekuti iwe unorema zvekutoti mari yako isoda kuti ibve kuna vanhu vakadarewa. So also they participate in the selection of staff. especially the ancillary staff and even the appointment heads. So it's quite, if you look at the new policy that is going to be adopted, it gives a lot of weight to the Board of Governors. Board of Governors, Doanese. And actually, in one of the sections, it actually says, besides liaising with the Minister of Primary and Secondary, Board of Governors are also supposed to guide the last point, guide and supervise school development committees. Because school development committees normally come and go, and when they come and go, they don't even realize, they are not even aware of the vision of the church and the vision of the mission or the mission of the church. They just come, and their worry is their daughter and their boy who is enrolled in the school. The broader vision issues are what's in SPCC. So rather than you say my heads, almost from so much money, take advantage of these boards to help you explain the vision, mission, and values of the church. So those are the issues. When you are talking of corporate issues, they receive reports from the Board of Governors, Finance Committee. Normally, the Board of Governors must have this Finance Committee that decides on how the SSF fund is used, and to receive reports on how the money would have used, to also help in the financial management of the school by managing financial position, etc., etc. The way these are supposed to be high-level responsibilities. If your board, I think the one point I want to make loud and clear is that if you have a board, but no square if you have a board, you must declare their interest and just leave. No amangarira kunoakaudza kuti makatiunzira chikwambo pana tinonorewo. So I think it is important, and our suspicion, our assumption is that when we appoint board members, we are appointing members with relevant school skills, because most of you are just heads and activities. You might not have the adequate financial skills or HR skills or legal skills that are required to execute your office. These are the guys to whom you present matters so that issues are dealt with. So in short, Board of Governors should be prioritized ahead of any other committee that we have. And as a matter of fact, actually, the budget they hold, the pace they hold, is much bigger than most of it, because the SSF is the pace with the most amount of money. The SDC is about just special levies that come once in a while. In fact, I was asking when we had our orientation last time, is an SDC necessary when we do not have levies for school development? Then also the Zimbabwe legislation always have, I think it was capitalist or socialist, it always gives the ordinary person power, because the parents' assembly decides on what fees must be paid. If you are a head or an SDC, you have to add your lungs out in order to prove. So boards also have a responsibility to cooperate with other stakeholders so that the living quarters for teachers and staff are up to date, and also ensure that the standards that have been set by government and the education department are complied with. So I think that's what I can say about School Board of Governors. If you don't get most of the things I said, it's quite a long presentation of Board of Governors, what they are expected to do. It's a lot, but the bottom line is that these are the clearest representatives of the responsible authority. So when you have a Board of Governors, you have the responsible authority, you have the church, you have the bishop participating, bishop's appointees participating in the day-to-day running of the school. Can I continue? I now move on to school development committees. School development committees, I think we should understand them in the context of 1980. If there is one thing that the government of Zimbabwe achieved from independence was the rapid expansion of education. Of course, I should say this with part of my time under the chief, because I once read the Manicaland and noted that the schools in the lower Manicaland are not as many issues to do around and other issues. But here there was a boom. I'm one of those who benefited from those sudden rise. I went to secondary school in 1984. In fact, 1984 we were founders. Tomakurema Apatobuga. Remazera Anweso Ashinjo was not going to mission school again of Apatobu. And Apatobu was the in thing. So what happened back then? Government from Norway started opening new schools, especially secondary school, because there was a bottleneck system. If you go to secondary school, you were supposed to come Watsambe. And in most cases, they will take Watsambe, they will take number 1 and number 2. But come independence, there was a boom of high schools. Most of us, we were taught by secondary school trained teachers. Because suddenly government just opened secondary schools like we have never seen. And there were no secondary school training teachers colleges. And very limited secondary, but nevertheless, then those who remember, government funding did not only fund allowances, government salaries and allowances, but provided furniture, even building material, almost anything you could think of back then. And education was free. I'm wondering if education was not free. I can say this because in his state he might not understand what I'm saying. Takenda kuchikoro pasina fees way. Tenda kuchikoro kudzidza. Pakazointroduced mafees kuma form 3 pakaita nyaya yazvo. Taitoziva mazana ekuti kwakuina vamwe vabereki vasingabhadhari fees vana vasati vadzima. Saka zvamwe tatanezana nazvo. taifanwa enda tega kubasa kwababa. Baba wangu vaisa zvino zvekuembaraswa kuenderwa kubasa nemwana akaika uniform. Saka taifanwa enda kubasa kwavo takapfeka uniform. Tafana aizvisingatega. So 1980 or 1991 ESAP came, and one key theory of ESAP was to reduce government expenditure. So in the end, government support to schools was reduced drastically. Those of us who went to government schools, taiziva kwapinana sekuru, makeatekwa government, they were hiding everything where was all those resources was where withdrawn. Even the per capita grants that mission schools would get were withdrawn. And there was then initially a call to involve parents more. Initially the Parents Teachers Association, and then 1992 the SDC. That's how SDCs came. Because to cover up the gap that has been, or the vacuum that has been left by government. So now the Education Act has now been amended, and now Section 36 now has a section on SDCs, and Section 38 of the Education Act has a section of SSF. So the Section 36 actually says the responsible authority of every registered school which a government grant is made shall establish an SDC. That's how the Education Act is framed. So we should ask ourselves, does government still make government grants to our schools? Not directly, but they pay salaries for our teachers. They pay salaries for our teachers. So statutory instrument number 87 of 1992 then states how an SDC should look like. I'm talking of as an SDC as a corporate governance structure. It is high up there. So it consists of 5 members elected by parents and guardians of pupils at a school, the school head, the deputy, a teacher rep, who technically should represent the government or the PEMSEC, and the RA rep. And the main objective of an SDC is collection and utilize school funds for the benefit of the school. So therefore the role of an SDC, thank you very much, is to mobilize resources to improve resources availability at a school. What's an SDC? Saka mukaona SDC singatauri basa rayo rekuti mari ngaiwande muno muchikoro kuti basa riitwe yarasika rarashika zvakanaka. I think we have to stop here. Thank you.
Marathon presentation, so lest he collapses, I will give him some time to rest. He hasn't finished his presentation. He will continue after the tea break. We are going to have 2 7 points for tea. One is in the next room. The other one is just behind. but the bars and the scores are outside. I forgot to mention to you, for your own information, we are being broadcast live throughout this workshop. So if you sleep, you will be caught napping. May I ask Baba Matikiti to pray for our tea?
That's Namate. So, Jedi Maria Masimo said, come to the Latin National Workshop. Yes, come to one Maria, break up with tea. So, Jedi and tea, you have come sheets from Comborera, and the Mapagazzi, and Venesu, Nobuna Jesu Christo takes away. Amen.
May I ask the Lord Bishop to lead us and then we'll follow it in the temple. Let's give way to the Lord Bishop first. Education secretaries.